Pretty much every organization or company or movement wants to know who their biggest competition is. Like, who are they up against? Who are they competing against? Okay, so this will be a little crowd participation moment. For instance, Coca-Cola, who would their number one competitor be? Pepsi. Okay, Burger King, who would it be? For Republicans, it would be. Okay, for the Red Sox, it would be. Okay, for Washington State University, it would be Walla Walla Community College. Now, I bring this up today to ask another question. Who do you think is Christianity's biggest competitor? So if you were to name the rival that could claim the largest number of people from actually putting their whole trust in Jesus, what would that competitor be? Christians. The Bible actually talks about this. And it doesn't name another religion or different faith. The biggest competitor to Christianity is a whole lot more subtle than that. In fact, it's subtle enough that millions of people go to church and they read the Bible and they think they're following Jesus, but in reality, they're not at all. They're actually pursuing the way of Christianity's biggest competitor, not the way of Jesus. And I would hate for that to happen to anyone here. And God would hate for that to happen to you. So we're going to start this morning with a classic passage from Scripture. A clear description of the way of Jesus and its primary competitor. Now here's what Paul writes. And we're going to read this together. We're going to read this together out loud. So here we go. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. Paul says the Jesus way is the way of grace. You've been saved, rescued, redeemed as a gift of grace. And the alternative to this, the competitor, is what he calls works. What we might call the spiritual performance plan. And we all get that because we live in a performance culture. Where we live, our worth is predicated on our performance. I have to get the right grades. I have to enter the right college. I have to get the right job. I have to date the right girls. I have to marry the right spouse. I have to buy the right house. I have to have the right kids. I have to get those right kids into the right schools. I have to build the right career. I have to achieve the right lifestyle. In our culture, it's all about performance. And in this kind of performance context, God can simply become the ultimate performance evaluator. It's all about performing at a high enough level, like morally or spiritually. So compared to other people, I have to go to church enough. I have to give money enough. I have to volunteer enough. I have to read the Bible enough. I have to pray enough. I have to do enough of whatever it is that I think I have to do or what my Christian culture tells me I have to do. I have to do enough good deeds, whatever that means. And all of that turns out to be quite exhausting. And Jesus says it's actually defeating and impossible. It's not his way. His way, the alternative way, is the way of grace. It's God's love, God's favor, God's forgiveness, God's power, God's presence available to every one of us right now, simply as a free gift of grace. Now you'd think, you look at that deal and go, that's something for nothing. And you'd think that everybody would say, oh, that's great, yay for grace. You think that people would be lining the streets, shaking it, to that song. It's all about grace, all about that grace, But it turns out, people are not generally as excited about this as you might think. It turns out there's a little sticking point to grace. Because Paul says that if we're saved by grace, he says then there's no room for boasting. In other words, the thing about grace is you don't deserve it. You don't earn it. See, grace is going to require inside of us this deep humbling. You think about that. Suppose you're being given an award. And at the award ceremony, the MC says, kind of looks at you from the mic and says, hey, before you come forward, we just want you to know you did nothing to earn this. There were a lot of people more deserving than you. We just kind of felt sorry for you. So we decided to give this to you as a free gift. You know what I'd say? Keep the dang thing. Okay, that's too humbling. I'm not interested in that. Or suppose your boss were to say to you, this new position that I'm giving you is a free gift. You did nothing for it. You didn't earn it. You haven't merited it. You didn't achieve it. You don't deserve it. You didn't win it. It's just grace. You know what I'd say? Like, no thanks. No thanks. That's too humbling. Okay, imagine a woman were to say to me, I'm marrying you as a sheer gift. You did nothing to earn it. You didn't merit it. You don't deserve it. I'm marrying you as a sheer act of grace. You know what I'd say? I do. And I actually did. That's pretty much how it went. Okay, pretty much like all the married guys in this room, I married up. Look, we don't necessarily like grace as much as we think we do. We don't necessarily like being given stuff that we didn't earn. See, grace says, you have a problem. I have a problem. And it's not just like a lack of education or a lack of maturity or whatever. It's a much bigger deal. It's the idea that we've been separated from a holy God. Like our sin, our fallenness, our darkness separates us. And so we need to be rescued. We need to be saved. We have a problem. And the biggest problem of all is we don't know how big our problem is. The prophet Jeremiah says, the heart is deceitful above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? Now, this is just truth. And this has largely been lost in our day because we live in such a therapeutic culture where we hate to knock anybody's self-esteem. But the prophets understood this, and they said, any morally or spiritually sane person will be absolutely undone by a thoughtful diagnosis of the human condition. The human heart is wicked and deceitful above all things. It just is. Now that's not the only truth about the human heart, but it is the truth about the human heart. Like being selfish and deceptive, it comes naturally to us. Now I was thinking about this last week, and for some reason, I thought about Bill Cosby. Not because his heart is especially deceitful or wicked. Like as human beings go, I think Bill Cosby's a pretty good one. Like he's used his career and his fame and really his whole life to promote family values. So like if you don't think Bill Cosby is awesome, you need awesome lessons. So I was thinking about him because of a stand-up routine that I saw years and years and years ago, back in 1983. Okay, how many of you weren't even born by 1983? Raise your hands. Oh. Okay, so I remember watching this at home, and I was about 10 years old, and it was broadcast. I think it was broadcast like on mainstream TV, like on ABC or NBC or CBS or something like that. And I remember that the next day, tons of people had watched it, and they loved it. So anyway, in his stand-up routine, he did this little bit on kids. About the reality that they're not always as honest and innocent as we like to think they are. Some of you are laughing, you remember this bit. About the reality that even really small kids can be unbelievably deceptive. And so we have it's about a 3-minute clip. Again, this is 1983, Bill Cosby, here we go.
People don't understand children, especially people who have no children. Person with no children says, well, I just love children. You say, why? And they say, well, because the child is so truthful. Children are truthful. That's what I love about them. They say the truth. That's a lie. I got 5 of them. The only time they tell the truth is if they're having pain. You get a 15-month-old child knows when to lie. You see, the child crawled into the cupboard to get its favorite cookie. 15-month-old child knows where the cupboard is, knows where its favorite cookie is, and it will open it up and sit down and take the cookie. You go over and you try to get the cookie from the child, which is also a contest. Here, let me have it. I've tried to take things away from grown people. I've never had to say, will you let me have, give me that thing. Here, let me have it. I'm telling you, let me have that thing. But here, a 15-month-old child is able to do this, and I can't grab it. Here, will you let me have it? Will you give that thing to me? So I take the cookie, and I take the box, and I put the cookie in the box, and I say, you can't have this. You understand? I don't want you to have the cookie. Now, and I put it way up here. Now, this 15-month-old child, after I've left the room, begins to build a very sophisticated ladder, climbs up the ladder, and begins to try to get the cookie. Now, you can hear the paper rustling, and that's in your favor because a 15-month-old child doesn't know that sound travels. They're also not bright enough to hire a lookout. So you hear the paper rattling, and you run, and there's a child standing there with the cookie. So you say, what are you doing? Now, this honest child looks at you and says, I was getting the cookie for you. So you say, I don't want the cookie. So then they say, well, can I have it?
So even a 15-month-old can be incredibly deceptive. Even a 15-month-old can do self-promotion and image management. And by the way, like Bill Cosby's kids must have been incredibly advanced. I'm thinking about my kids at 15 months, okay, they weren't even walking yet. Like they were not building sophisticated ladders, and they definitely weren't speaking coherent sentences. So I don't know what's going on at his house, but I understand the point. Kids are not always honest, even really little ones. You know, the human heart is deceitful above all things. And the thing is, we don't have to be taught to do this stuff. This just comes natural to us. We all have selfish, sort of base kinds of thoughts and behaviors, and we get very, very good at masking them. I do. You do. Okay, we all do. This is human nature. And as adults, we're more skilled than toddlers at hiding it. And so we can actually, if we're really good at it, we can project an image that is super polished. Now, let's take this just a step deeper. Imagine with me that later today, you were to gather with a bunch of people to watch the Seahawks game. So everyone's like crammed into a living room, and they're wearing their jerseys, and it's testosterone filled and chip eating, and there's a sea of blue. Only instead of the game, what comes up on the screen is the innermost contents of your heart. So like you're expecting Russell Wilson, but instead it's all of your stuff right there for everybody to see in stunning high definition. Every hateful thought, every gossipy word, every greedy act, every time you've lied, every out-of-bounds fantasy. It's all up on the screen. Okay, so the party stops, and they look at the TV, and then they look at you. Okay, and it's all your hidden habits, every act of betrayal, every wrong choice, all the flattery and all the faking, every time you've pretended to care about someone, but actually didn't. Every time that you've used somebody and they really thought you liked them. all the cries of needy people around you that you could have helped but didn't. Okay, all kinds of stuff that, at least for me, if I were looking at a screen of my own stuff, would surprise me. Because my heart, which is deceitful above all things, has enabled me to ignore about myself, or to forget, or to minimize, or to rationalize. But there it is, bam, like in widescreen clarity. And now imagine having that experience with a face-to-face encounter with the God of the universe. The God who made you and who is himself perfectly pure, who never has a dark thought and is all-powerful and loves his creation so much that it kills him to see it marred and twisted by darkness and by deceit. And that's the deal. Because see, it may be, we can get really good at hiding it from the people all around us. To a large degree, even the truth about me is hidden from me. But it's not hidden from God. He sees it all. He knows it all. And this is exactly why the prophets insist that any human being with any kind of moral or spiritual sanity will be absolutely wrecked by this, just undone by this. See, grace says that there is this enormous gap between me and God that's actually broader than anything I can possibly conceive. And my performance is never, ever, ever going to cross it. And worse than that, the wages, the consequences, the inevitable outcome of sin, of this darkness, of this fallenness inside of me is death. It's physical death, it's spiritual death, it's death in 1,000 ways to the world around us and to us. And so, if judged by my performance, there's no hope. But the alternative, the Jesus way, is grace. It's grace. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word grace, tend to not understand how staggering it is. People think of nice, polite, hospitable, like a low-cost transaction, like a gracious host or, a gracious comment, that kind of thing. But the grace of God is nothing like that. If we really get to what it means to be saved by grace, it will wreck us. Because the free gift of grace that's available to us was not so free for God. There was a price to pay, a huge price. The Bible uses a number of different pictures to convey the depth, the meaning of what happened on the cross. Sometimes it uses the language of the marketplace, like Jesus paid a debt for me that I could never pay. It uses the language of the temple and worship. Jesus offered the perfect sacrifice that I could never offer. It uses the language of a courtroom and justice. Jesus suffered the punishment in my place so that I don't have to suffer. He did my time for me. And in all of these, he was taking my place. And you understand the act of one human being giving a life to love another is the most noble and compelling act of any human story. This is what moves us to tears. It moves us like nothing else. I still remember a story that I heard more than 20 years ago. I was 19 years old, and I was at a men's gathering at a church in Everett, and I'd been a Christian for about a month, maybe less. And I wanted to learn how to be a better man, how to be a better father, someday a better husband. And I remember the speaker telling this story about a father's love. And it was a fairly lengthy, detailed story, and there's no way I could retell it, but I'll give you the gist. It was about a father and his 3 sons that were out sailing. And they were off the coast a little ways when they got hit by this horrendous, unexpected storm. Now, the dad remained calm, and he directed his boys, and they did everything that they could to get their boat and themselves back to safety. But they weren't quite able to make it. And the boat capsized, and all 4 of them were tossed into the sea. Now, the 2 oldest boys were very strong swimmers, and so they immediately just headed for shore. But the dad headed for the youngest son, not as strong of a swimmer. And the youngest son was doing all that he could just to keep his head above the water. The swells and the current were just like overwhelming. And after about 10 minutes of trying to like tow his son toward shore and realizing he was only losing ground, like just being pushed out farther and farther, the dad came to a moment of realization that all of this was hopeless. And it was an agonizing moment. He had enough strength, if he wanted to turn and just swim to shore by himself. But he would have to abandon his son to do it. So as the older two boys crawled up on the shore, completely spent, and looked out over the sea, the last image they saw was their father and their brother. And they had their arms wrapped around each other as they just floated out to sea. They just held on to each other as long as they possibly could until the end. Now, I heard that story 20 years ago. And that image, for some reason, the image of the two of them gripping each other, hopelessly heading out to sea, is so powerful to me. Because there's something deeply moving about sacrificial love. And here's the thing about the grace of God. The cross tells us that a story of that kind of love lies at the very heart of human existence. It lies at the very heart of God. See, without the cross, there's no such thing as Christianity. There's just a performance plan. Okay, at the cross, by grace, we're invited into what you might call the great exchange. At the cross, I exchanged my old guilt for his innocence. I exchanged my old death for his never-ending life. I exchanged my old wounds for his healing. I exchanged my old enslavement, okay, for his freedom. I exchanged my old despair for his hope. And this can happen for anybody at any time. And this can happen for you. But none of this happens by working the spiritual performance plan. See, if I miss grace, I miss peace with God. I miss the forgiveness of my sins. I miss having the power to change. I miss comfort in grief and purpose in life and hope beyond death. If I miss grace, I miss it all. I miss Jesus. And I was thinking this week about how, like, utterly pointless sort of the pursuit of the spiritual performance plan really is. Because, like, if the standard of God's holiness is Jesus, like his life and his goodness, like if that's the standard, if that's what I got to live up to, not just being a little better than Joe Schmo next to me, if the standard for God's holiness is Jesus, why would I ever even try to live up to that? Okay, that's a no-win situation. I mean, you think about that standard. I have to stack up to Jesus? Like perfect love and purity at every moment? No deceit, no lies, no out-of-bounds fantasies like ever? No gossip, no dark thoughts, okay, or selfish motives that are masked with love? None of that stuff, ever. Like no stealing, ever. Like not even cookies from the cupboard. That's an impossible standard. To try to perform our way into God's grace is absolutely absurd. And so I was thinking this week about like what that's like. And I had a weird idea that came into my mind. And I don't know if this is going to be helpful or not. Okay, but here it goes. My son, Cameron, plays on a very competitive 8th grade basketball team. And he has good players all around it, but there's 2 kids on the team that are like freakish athletes. So in the 8th grade, these 2 kids now are starting to dunk. At halftime last weekend, they were, had nothing going on. These 2 got out on the floor and just decided to dunk at halftime. And the other team looked over and they were like, oh man. And so these guys were like, they realized the other team's looking over and they're strutting around like, yeah, I'm all that. grab the rim and yak on it. And the truth is, even for me, it's pretty impressive. I mean, most 8th grade boys can't dunk. In fact, most 18-year-old boys can't dunk. And this might be like horrendously shocking for some of you because I'm so unbelievably athletic, but I can't dunk. Now, back in the day, I couldn't dunk then either. I've actually never dunked. But on Cameron's 8th grade team, there's 2 dunkers. And it is impressive. I mean, it is. Now, and this is where the story's going to get weird. But let's imagine that God said, here's what I'm going to do. Like, here's going to be my arrangement for humanity. This is going to be the deal. Everybody that can jump high enough will meet the standard, okay? As long as you jump high enough, as far as I'm concerned, between me and you, you are good to go. So everybody's like, wow, that's cool. And everybody starts jumping around. And some people can barely jump at all. And some people, man, they can get up. I mean, like they got hops. And so the serious jumpers, they're jumping around and they start jumping with swagger, the head's cocking. They're like, yeah. Did you see me get up? I got hops, baby. Look at how I stack up. I jump higher than that 80-year-old. And I jump higher than that guy, and I jump higher than that guy, and I jump higher than that whole group of ladies over there. Just like, oh yeah, I can fly. Hey God, did I jump high enough to meet your standard? Hey, just out of curiosity, God, what is the standard? And so God says, well, actually, to meet the standard, you have to be able to jump up and touch. And they're like, oh yeah, the rim. I got to jump up and touch the rim. Did you see it? God, I got it. I mean, did you see it? It was awesome. And God says, oh, actually, I was going to say, you have to be able to jump up and touch the moon. Now, this is a really stupid analogy. I totally get that. But do you see what I'm saying here? Trying to live up to God's standard of moral perfection is pretty equivalent to us jumping up and trying to touch the moon. But we look at other people that also fall woefully short, and we say, but I'm doing better than that guy, and I'm doing better than that guy, and look at the guy in prison. I'm winning that one. It's like absurd. I mean, if the standard was jumping up and touching the moon, just thinking through this, if the standard was that's the goal, jumping up and touching the moon, what difference would it make if you could jump like a few inches or even a few feet higher than the person next to you? You're still like miles and miles and miles short. Okay, so here's a stupid picture of people trying to do the performance plan. It's like we're all jumping around going, how am I doing compared to everybody else? How's it going? Have I done it? Did I jump high enough? And God is like, no. Like, no. Not even close. Okay, which is why, see, I have another way. See, the spiritual performance plan is like hopeless and stupid. And yet, because of our human nature, because of our performance-based culture, because we don't like to humble ourselves, we're powerfully tempted to pursue Jesus' biggest rival. Like you can go to church and you can sit there for years and you can read the Bible and you can do all the disciplines and still at the same time do all of that because you're pursuing the biggest rival to Jesus. The great question is never, have you lived a good enough life? The question is never, have you met God's standard for holiness? The question is never, how do you stack up compared to other people? But there is a vital question that Jesus asks us. It's his ultimate question, and everything hinges on it. Jesus looks at every one of us, and he simply asks, will you receive me by grace? It's that simple. And here's the truth. The only way, okay, the only way that anyone gets a seat at God's table is as a beggar. But no matter who you are, no matter what you've done, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, last week, last night, you are welcome at the table. God has a place for you, and He's paid for it already. And you need to know that when you sit down and you look around the table and you see all the other people at the feast, they're all beggars too. Nobody earned their way. Nobody deserves it. And that is the thing that unifies us all. For it is by grace we've all been saved through faith. And this is not from ourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. And the question Jesus is asking you today is simple. It has nothing to do with your performance. It's very simply, will you receive me by grace? It's all about that grace, about that grace. No matter where you've been, no matter who you are, no matter how far short you've come, the question is the same. Will you receive me by grace? That's the way of Jesus. And so I just want to take some time this morning, and we're going to spend like a little bit of extra time in worship. And I just want us to reflect on the heart of our faith. And maybe some of you came in here this morning feeling like totally defeated spiritually. Some things are off in your life, and you know it. And you wonder where you are with God. And you wonder if He really loves you, if He could really love you. You need to know that no matter what, no matter where you've been, what you've done, the question of Jesus is always the same, and He's asking it every single moment. Will you receive me by grace? And today we're going to take communion together. The bread represents His body broken for us, and the juice represents His blood shed for us. And I just want to encourage you as we worship to take some time and reflect on your life. To just like be honest. Like humble yourself and be honest and talk to Him about where you're falling short. And then simply receive Him by grace. Okay, so let's spend some time in worship reflecting, and then when you're ready, you can go to the table and you can kneel there and spend time. You can kind of stand and take it off to the side. You can take it back to your chair, however you want to do that. And I want to say one last thing. As we're worshiping this morning, and we have said this from time to time over the years at Brookview, there's more than one right way to worship. There's more than one right posture for worshiping. Some of you, when you're worshiping, you really want to stand. You just would prefer to stand. Some of you would prefer to sit. Some of you would prefer to sit with kind of head bowed. You think about God and you think about coming before a king, and it's like a lower your eyes. That's the posture you want to have. Some of you want to raise your hands. All of that is okay. It's all okay. And so I just encourage you that if you're someone that wants to stand, stand. If you're somebody that wants to sit, sit. If you want to raise your hands, do that. I would just say, as you're thinking through options of what you could do, be mindful of the people around you so that the focus is actually on Jesus for them and not you. But otherwise, okay, we don't have to stand and sit at the same time. We don't. And so I just encourage you to do that in the way that it makes sense.